We have three presenters today. We have Randy. He is a city traffic engineer for the city of St. Paul, has 25 years of experience in the transportation engineering, traffic engineering, roadway design, and project management. Randy leads the city traffic engineering division, which is responsible for all traffic engineering design functions, traffic signal operations, and parking management. Prior to joining the city, Randy worked with the city of Eden Prairie and consulting firms in both Minneapolis and the Chicago areas. In his time at Eden Prairie, Randy spent a number of years working on planning and design of the Southwest LRT. Randy is a past member of the NCITE board, serving as president in 2009. In his free time, he enjoys spending time with his family, traveling, biking, playing hockey, and most recently building a Ninja Warrior playset for his son. Tom Sachi is an associate traffic engineer at SRF in the traffic studies group and has been with SRF for over 7 years. His work includes a wide variety of development and event managing traffic studies, along with parking studies, travel demand management plans, and corridor studies. Tom and his wife just had their first baby earlier this year, which is keeping him very occupied outside of work. Finally, we have Phil Koulis. Phil is an associate traffic engineer at SRF and has been with SRF for over 4 years. Prior to joining SRF, Phil worked at Kittleson & Associates. His work with SRF includes a variety of different traffic engineering aspects, such as operations, signal operations, corridor studies, and safety analyses. Phil is one of the NCIT directors this year and the current chair of the Intersection Traffic Control Committee. And with that, we'll start the presentation.
Oh yeah, over that side there. Okay. All right, I know we're a little pinched for time here, so we'll try not to run through it too quick. This is the Allianz Field TMP Transportation Management Plan overview for what we had done for the opening year of events here. So a quick agenda here. Obviously, we've introduced and everything. Project overview. It's the Allianz Field TMP. We'll run through kind of our process for how we planned this, what kind of went into it. We did some field data collection on the first couple games to get a feel for, was our modeling experience correct? Did we need to adjust it for anything? Did something pop up somewhere we didn't expect? And then we did a comparison between that with our VSIM modeling, and then some key findings from both the modeling and then our data that we collected. And then we are also doing some ongoing work here in the future, helping update the TMP as going into the next year, and then modifying for new events if there's anything different that comes up outside of soccer games. So kind of a brief overview. Minnesota United came into the MLS in 2017. Currently the stadium's about 19,500. There is potential to expand it up to 25,000. I don't think there's any current plan for that right now, but I think that's kind of a wait-and-see approach into the future. In addition to the soccer stadium, there's also a large mixed-use development plan for the entire superblock over there. It includes housing, retail, office space, movie theater, anything you can kind of name it. It's all kind of involved there. And that's very transit, multimodal focused. It's right on the Green Line, right on the A line, right next to 94. So kind of everything, all sorts of modes here. So location, I'm sure everyone knows Snelling University intersection pretty well. Right on the Green Line, right near 94, right near the interchange at Snelling and 94. So kind of an overview of the mixed-use development. An AUAR was completed for the AM and PM peak hour operations that went into this. Like I said, housing, retail, office, significant component with that. That's not the focus of this study or this presentation here, but what we're also looking at is the event traffic management. And so some of the key things that went into our plan was trip distribution, space planning for pedestrians and shuttle users and Uber Lyft people, the multimodal needs, how are we going to cross people across Snelling, how are we going to cross people across University, making sure it's safe, efficient, and then the departure duration. This is usually the most important part of the event. Arrival is a little more dispersed, but usually departure all occurs at one time. So managing that that experience and the expectations. So the 2019 season, there's 17 home games for the actual MLS season, taking place at a wide variety of times. The key times here are Wednesdays at 7 p.m. There's 4 games with that, and then Saturdays starting at 3 or 4. Those key times were found by the background traffic at those times. So Wednesday arrival at 6 p.m., kind of coinciding with the PM peak hour. So that's a key thing there. And then the Saturday, 3 to 4 p.m., there's a large retail component over in that area now. So you're looking at that conflicting with all the game time traffic either arriving or departing at those times. Then there's been additional matches there. The U.S. Women's National Team, they have the U.S. Open Cup, which is MLS teams and I think other division soccer teams playing it, and then other friendlies and exhibitions against other random teams. So our project team here, it was a full slate of participants here. Everyone from the city of St. Paul, Public Works, Planning, Police, Ramsey County, Metro Transit, Met Council, MnDOT. The team was heavily involved in this too, obviously. But the St. Paul Police is bolded there. They probably play the biggest role in making sure that this operation works. There's anywhere between 25 and 40 officers out there post-game to make sure, the plan is in place and that everything is happening smoothly, keeping people safe, keeping vehicles away from pedestrians, and just managing all of that.
I just jump in here. I think just as a note as we move forward, this is police's baby. So once we start implementation, they're the ones that own the transportation management plan. We in Public Works get to support them, but they really own it. So basically, they're out on the street making the call about how things will be managed. So as we go through this process, I can be kind of clear as we're getting to the end of the process, our police quickly lost interest and ready for opening day. And once opening day is, they will do as they see fit. And I say they were very open to listening and taking our input, but ultimately it is their plan, they own it, and I just got to share that because I think that is an important element. There are different breed of engineers, and we have to take that into account.
Yeah, they definitely kind of do what they want and do what they see fit, and they've been going about that here. So the mode split, which is probably the most important part here, one of the big key things that we were trying to identify was how many people are going to walk, bike, take the train, drive over here. Obviously, everyone knows there's a very limited amount of parking spaces, and then A-line, and so kind of the method behind this was for the walking, biking. We found the zip code, or we were given the zip code information of the season ticket holders for the team, mapped it out, and kind of found, okay, how many people live within a three-quarter mile area, kind of a walking distance. How many people live within a 1 mile to 5 mile kind of easy bike commute there, and then how many people are outside of that. So that's where we derived the walk-bike number from. The 2,000 bus, charter, bar, your local bus, and then taxi rideshare. So this is probably the one that was somewhat the most unknown. Uber, Lyft, it's kind of hard to pinpoint how many people take Uber, Lyft, because they don't really get dropped off at one spot, whether we want them to or not. And then the bar shuttles are infrequent and not consistent. So we had roughly 1,100 parking spaces nearby that we knew of. The next slides will cover, there's definitely more parking spaces in lots that came about, and that's just something we weren't able to plan for. I don't think some of those places knew they were going to do it quite yet. And then the heavy transit usage with the A-line and the Green Line, most of that is derived on how much can the A-line and the Green Line handle in 1 hour. What we found from other stadiums is roughly that 1 hour time frame is about how long it takes from the time the game ends to how long people actually wait to take transit. It's consistent with Gopher and Viking games, a little different at Target Field and XL and Energy Center. And then we were kind of stuck with, all right, we have like 4,300 people left. How do we manage these people? We're not going to direct them to park in the neighborhood, whether we like that happened or not, but we need to provide a mode for them. So that's where the shuttle to the State Fair came in. So like I said, the parking we've got over here, laser pointer doesn't work too well, but there's a big healthy slot nearby that can handle a bunch of spaces. There's a bunch of spaces on site. And I know there's other spaces around. I think Target sells some of theirs, Cub sells some of theirs, Walmart sells some of theirs. So there's definitely other areas around here that accommodate surface spots. And then the shuttle. So the shuttle goes to and from the state fairgrounds. They park on the south side of the fair. Key thing to know is when we developed the shuttle was it cannot drive on Snelling. It has to take a different route than taking Snelling or any of the areas around here. We want to get the shuttle buses out from where we're crossing all the transit users. So they currently pick up on the south side of the stadium and then head on to 94, and they take that loop up to there via 280. So pre-event road closures here. So this is one of the kind of starting out the game day here is roughly 3 hours before the game. You start to block off the site, and they use the pyramid barriers. Warning Lights has been a great partner in helping them get this taken care of. But basically securing the site, limiting any other vehicles on site. I think technically these are city streets through here, and there is some on-street parking through here, so all that needs to be managed to be moved before the game time. So basically just securing the site. One plan we had here was to close down Pascal Street, which is on the east side of the stadium. The idea here was we could close this down and use it for some shuttle storage, and there was going to be a lot of pedestrian movements back and forth. Ultimately, I think that lasted 20 minutes, and the police made a decision to open it back up. So we kind of had to roll with what they wanted to do, but the plan was to keep that closed.
So you just said you talked about the streets. So every street around the stadium is a city street with a couple exceptions. University on the north side of the site is a county road. Snelling on the west side of the site is a state road. And then the St. Anthony frontage road, I'm not exactly sure where the jurisdiction changes, but part of that's MnDOT and obviously 94. One thing I'd just share about the site is it's very centrally located. It's great access to transit. There's existing A-line service, existing Green Line service. But one of the issues is that this was all built pre-stadium. It was built without the stadium in mind. So although this infrastructure is there, it was not built to handle mass amounts of people at one time. So that was one of the challenges in putting this plan together is, where do you put these people? How do you efficiently get them to use that transit service? Same thing with really the sidewalk network. This was the area around this, it is urban. There was sidewalks, there were some bike lane facilities, but once again, it was not built originally with the stadium in mind. So along Snelling, along University, we're dealing with narrow sidewalks. So this is one of the challenges we had to deal with in terms of pedestrian management, where people went, how they'd be queued, is that very urban, very central, but the infrastructure that was built was not meant to handle a large stadium arrival and departure.
Yep. So kind of moving forward to in the middle of a match here, what's the plan for how does everything move off-site once that match ends? So during and near the end of the event, some of the road closures start nearby. We'll detail that in the next couple slides here, but this one kind of deals with where do you store all these buses? We have this grand transit plan, lots of shuttling, but where do we keep them on site? So we keep some of them on site for the shuttle buses. They're shown in red, so those go to the fairgrounds. The items in blue here are extra A-line buses. The southbound buses queue up in the eastbound lane of University between Fry and Snelling. And so that lane is closed off to traffic and is stored for buses. The A-line northbound buses originally were supposed to be on Pascal where it was closed. Things were changed, obviously, and now we actually queue them on Snelling in on the rightmost lane of northbound Snelling that kind of serves as a right turn lane into the site. Obviously, no one's turning into the site, so it doesn't need to be open. So we're able to put buses there. And then you have your charter, shuttle buses. So those are your group comes from Rochester, group comes from Duluth, and then your bars, your Shamrocks, maybe some of the soccer bars might run their own shuttle to from the stadium for their bar users. And then additionally, we have the idea was that eastbound University lane between Snelling and Pascal would be to store police vehicles. Obviously, there's a ton of police out here. They need to get there somehow. And then Metro Transit operation vehicles. There's a lot of different Metro Transit operators and train operations people that are out here making sure things run smoothly, but we were able to close that lane down, and that's important because closing that lane down shortens the crossing of University for transit users. So without, they only have to cross one lane of traffic, and the police only have to stop one lane of traffic.
I'll jump into. I think that was actually a little bit of a compromise. Early in the process, Metro Transit actually asked us to completely close University before and after events, basically to both queue passengers and just sort of safely cross them. So we had a lot of discussion about that, decent amount of debate, and kind of that called the compromise or conclusion we got to is that some traffic through there was better than trying to manage a full closure of University, as long as we could keep traffic moving slowly and also sort of better manage it. So by taking it down to a single lane, it was just easier for our police to manage it and sort of safely get peds across the street, shorten the crossing. So that was sort of the compromise that we came to.
And that leads straight into this post-event road closures here. So Spruce Tree Drive essentially Spruce Tree Drive and Fry Street, kind of that quadrant turn from Snelling University. That whole area there is closed. It's used for transit storage for westbound light rail. So we keep that area closed off. One lane on St. Anthony is closed for your Uber Lyft drop off to give that an area to specifically go. Now, in our experience, that hasn't really worked very well. Uber Lyft people kind of go wherever they want, the drivers and the customers. So that's one thing we're for sure going to have to work on next year. And then, like Randy said, that eastbound University up there, and there's a lot of discussion about closing it initially, and then all the detour routes, and it was decided to keep one lane open. So transit storage, obviously we have a large amount of people using transit. We're talking about 7,500 people. Where are we going to queue them? Because we can't clear them all on trains immediately. Westbound LRT, the idea is they will exit the stadium, cross Snelling at the old Spruce Tree signal. There's a gate opening there, which has proven to be maybe a little too tight, but then queue them along Spruce Tree Drive there. And then eastbound LRT will use the platforms and then the roadway there, furthest one east, that's colored in yellow. We've never found queues to be anywhere near these lengths. They're usually pretty short. Transit operations work pretty well. We were able to get extra trains from Metro Transit, and then obviously the extra buses that we had out here. So more or less, once one train fills, the next one comes in and clears it. So it's a pretty slick operation. There's a lot of wayfinding signs on site. That one shown there in the corner there is kind of what was there. I know initially they had people out there on megaphones telling people where to go. I'm not sure they have that anymore, but
Still out there.
they're still out there. So it's still a learning experience for some. And you can see in this picture here, this is Fry Street, the queue near the old pawn shop there, and what kind of queuing you're looking at. So the key elements here for our plan were, how do we clear this site within about an hour? That's generally about how long it usually takes most events in the Twin Cities to clear. Fencing to keep pedestrians where you want them to go, mainly to manage them, keep them safe, and funnel them into the right spots. The Snelling LRT stations, obviously we talked about the extra trains there. That was a key component. Initially we didn't know if we had those extra trains, but we were able to get those. Metro Transit providing extra buses, allowing enough time for crossing pedestrians. We have to cross everyone for LRT, either across Snelling and University, so we've got a lot of people moving across those. And then avoiding sending any additional traffic through the Snelling University intersection, because that just leads to more conflict with your LRT users. We run through the timing modifications quick. There's flashing yellow arrow at the interchange. We turn that off, given the amount of pedestrian crossings that were going on. It didn't even get to be used anyway, so we just switched everything to protected only. We ran the PM peak plan for departure, giving the most potential time out there. And I made some offset modifications. And then one of the other key things here was making sure that the traffic control officers out there worked in conjunction with the signal faces. So there's traffic control officers at that mid-block crossing of Snelling. We made sure that they were able to cross people and start and stop the crossing in conjunction with the phases at Snelling University. We kind of let that signal dictate everything, how it runs, but making sure the officers start and stop people at the right time, so you don't have a bunch of cars queue up waiting for people to go.
Sorry, a couple other details. One is at the I think it's the Fry signal, just to the west of Snelling, immediately west of the LRT station. You know, we're used to trains coming in here taking 10 seconds to load and move on. Now we were trying to load them with 600 people, and so their dwell time in the station was much more significant before and after game than typical time. So we did have to do some timing modifications to the Fry signal to account for that, and not basically not create an impediment to pedestrians and allow the trains to get out of there faster. Similarly, we had a little bit of an issue at Snelling and University, and we actually lowered the walk time so that we had some goat walk. The goat walk would come up while the green was still going on, because we wanted to accommodate some turn movements through the intersection. So we allowed the pedestrians to go. Once the pedestrians, kind of made their initial go, police could help stop them and allow the right turns or left turn movements to happen. So that was just another little tweak we made in signal timings for event plans.
One other key thing there with the transit queuing, you'll notice that we weren't trying to load transit users via Snelling University intersection. We wanted them off to the sides. This was one, to get them not to cross in the Snelling University intersection. There's enough going on there, but also being able to take advantage of the platforms. We can fit one full train load of people on the westbound platform and probably 2 full train loads of people on the eastbound platform. So you kind of get a free queuing space there, and kind of keep those platforms full, so when the next train comes, they can just go. Phil, I can let you talk a little here about the traffic simulation.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about some of the traffic operations analysis we did. Hopefully it's not too in the weeds. There's a lot of traffic engineers here, so hopefully it's interesting. So one thing we used was PTV, VSIM, and VisWalk. So for this model, there's a lot going on in it. So we were modeling pedestrians as well as all the vehicles, LRT, A-line. So it really called for a complex model. So at the end of it, we'll go through some of the results from this. One of the questions is, how close is your model? I mean, every model is incorrect, but some are better than others. So with this complicated model, modeling pedestrians, we were really curious to know, were we close with the models versus what actually occurred in the field? So I'll show some results for that as well. So yeah, as I mentioned, the model included all modes of transportation around the site, and it was really used throughout the process to help answer a lot of questions. How long was the departure going to be? How much space was needed to queue up the pedestrians, both before crossing Snelling, and then also the platforms for the LRT. You can go to the next slide. So as Tom had mentioned, we collected some data at some of the first few events. So we used video mounted cameras, or cameras mounted to capture some video. So here is the Snelling Avenue crossing as people are going through the fence that Tom had mentioned. So this was one of the bottlenecks, is this fence on Snelling Avenue. That's where they were crossed, and that's where they were used in conjunction with University Ave and Snelling Ave intersection. So what we were doing was looking to see the number of pedestrians using the crossing, seeing how fast they're walking, density that they stored at. So this is one of our key areas. Next one. So here is some of how it was set up. You can see at crossing some of the views that were captured from the video. We use my vision to count the video. As you can imagine, counting thousands of pedestrians crossing an intersection, that's pretty hard to do by hand. So we use MyoVision, so that's automatically processing the video using video processing equipment. So it was able to much more accurately count that intersection, count that crossing, what we would have been able to do just by visually doing that. And you can imagine the amount of air and boredom it would be sitting there counting with thousands of pedestrians. So that worked out pretty well for us. So some of the things we were looking at. So in the model, we had to enter pedestrian walking speed. So how fast are pedestrians walking free flow speed? That was one of the parameters entered in the model. Distribution time leaving the event. So we had to come up with what's the profile after the event lets out of when people are actually leaving. Are they staying for a while? So what's the intensity loading of the pedestrians? And we were looking at the number of pedestrians crossing Snelling Avenue. So was our mode distribution close? Were we seeing the amount of pedestrians using that crossing going to LRT and the A line that we expected? And then lastly was the density of pedestrians. The density of pedestrians queue at, that obviously dictates how much space they need. So that directly feeds into pedestrian fencing that was needed, and then also just the sheer volume and storage to queue up all those pedestrians. So talking about the first one, so in the Visa model, we assumed the average walking speed of 3.5 feet per second. There wasn't a whole lot of data to go on. I mean, pedestrians aren't typically modeled, so you have to make a lot of assumptions to just go based off of what a lot of defaults are. So in the model, it was 3.5 feet per second. Well, then when we looked in the field data, we took a few different points there at the Snelling crossing. So we captured the first few leaving the crossing, going across Snelling. These are people that we think would be at their free flow speed. There's no one in front of them really hindering what speed they can walk at. They were walking a little bit faster, so they're at 4.6 feet per second. Middle of the pack was slower, so 3.3, so that's there's pedestrians in front of them. They're having to bottleneck down through fencing, so they were slower. But then the back of the pack was a little bit faster, which is a little interesting. But when you watch the video, I mean, they start to disperse out there at the end. There's not as many people at the end crossing, so they can go a little bit faster. So overall, we were a little bit slower in the model than what was in the field. So moving forward, something you could account for with pedestrians, modeling them is they typically are a little bit more of a hurry to be the first one to get to the LRT to leave an event. Second one was looking at the distribution of pedestrians leaving the event. So this is the profile once the game lets out. How long are people staying around site? How long is it taking them to get to where they're going? Or how long to get to their various modes of transportation? So what we were looking at is a little bit after the game ended, and then it really peaks up, and then so the red is VSUM. So we assumed that it loaded quicker and then slowed down, but these middle two time periods were actually flipped in the field in VSUM. So it took pedestrians longer. It took pedestrians longer to exit the stadium than what we had assumed. So we didn't model actually individual pedestrians leaving their site in the stadium or leaving their seat from the stadium. We modeled that they were in the stadium and then they were leaving. But it takes a lot longer to get out of your seat and exit the stadium than what we had coded in the model. So here is a picture of the VSUM model and the crossing of Snelling. So you see there's a ton of pedestrians crossing there. This was something that was pretty interesting. So in the field, we measured roughly 3,300 people using that crossing after the event. And so each crossing time was 230 to 275 crossings. So each time the officers let people cross Snelling, they were getting roughly 230 to 275 across there. In VSUM, we were showing fewer than what was actually there. So in the peak hour, we had the 2,200, 2,300. But if you look at the total duration of our model, so I'll talk about it in just a second. We showed it took longer to clear the site than what it did. If you look at our overall model time, we're actually pretty close. It was roughly 3,200 in the model. So our assumption that most people be using the LRT and A-line was pretty accurate. So we were pretty happy with that. So as you can see, each crossing we're getting fewer through. So that deals with some of the slower pedestrian walking speeds. So they weren't getting through as fast. And it also deals with how the officers control that crossing. So in the model, we just ran it with a signal controller, just did exactly what Snelling was doing. So we were able to match that pretty close. But then in the field, officers generally, they're more generous. They allow pedestrians to cross longer than what we had assumed. So then Snelling traffic's getting held up a little bit, but more pedestrians are able to cross. So that was another factor of why they're able to cross faster in real life than what we had modeled. But police officers are a little bit nicer, so. So here is the departure duration. So as Tom had mentioned, one of the key items we were looking at was how long after an event lets out does it take for everyone to clear off the site and get to their various modes of transportation to head home. So as you match ends there, model clear time was down here. We were showing roughly 60 minutes it took, but then the actual clear time was faster. 45 minutes is generally how long after a game lets out until everyone's off the site. And I think that's something that pretty much most people are happy with. Metro Transit's really happy with how quickly they're getting all their trains loaded and out of there. And then St. Paul Police, they're super happy with how that's going as well. The clear time is aided by the number of trains Metro Transit's sending. So in our model, we also didn't assume that there'd be any extra trains. During the whole process up until the actual games, it was basically stated that they couldn't send any additional trains. So we had to work with what they were running, so the 10-minute headways. But in reality, now they actually send a couple additional trains, so that really actually helps, obviously, get more pedestrians out of there quicker. And then looking at the density of pedestrians queuing, basically our model, we were showing pedestrians would be willing to queue way more compactly than what they actually do in the field, which is a little surprising. I mean, a lot of people, you think after an event, after a concert, they're jam-packed in there, really trying to get where they're going. After the soccer games, we didn't see that as much. And the platform actually was starved a few times when you're watching it, so for the LRT. So the train's still waiting as people are filtering up, so that deals with some of the time that it takes, the longer load times that Randy had mentioned. So we had timed it roughly 3 minutes a train it takes to load from the time the train pulls up till it leaves, which some of that's longer because the platform's starved. All the people that were on the platform had loaded up, and then you just had people single file filtering up through the platform, so that deals with part of that. So that was some of the key results from our analysis. I mean, overall, I think we were pretty happy with how closely our model replicated the actual conditions in the field. I mean, it was such a complicated model. I mean, it was used for a lot of decisions, so we were hopeful, but you never know. So at the end, it worked out pretty well. I think it modeled the conditions accurately and got us the answers we needed.
So there was a few plan modifications that were made pretty much immediately in the first game. The first one here is that all that Health East parking, originally we had planned it would all go out via Aldine, which is on the west side of their area. From what we can tell is some of the parking here comes out on Shields and then heads back to Snelling, which we were really hoping it wouldn't do, but we're kind of up to the mercy of how that stuff gets out.
I think one of the things we did notice is that it's not really controlled, so they put up some wooden barriers, and a couple times we found those wooden barriers moved. So it's one of these good intentions, but unless you have someone watching and making sure that it doesn't happen, it potentially will.
Yep. The free westbound right off of St. Anthony on Snelling for the post game, usually about a half hour after the game lets out, that ends up getting closed down by the police. There's no way a vehicle can get through there with the amount of pedestrians coming out, and so rather than have any potential conflict there, they just closed it down and said you can't make this turn for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's way more pedestrians crossing here than expected going southbound into all the neighborhoods down here for parking. So this sidewalk is completely jam-packed, and then there's tons of pedestrians crossing here. There's parking over here, so you can't really make any right turns there, even if it was permitted.
Actually, this is kind of going back to that parking lot, but one of the things we saw that was there were a lot more people coming out at Shields from the west side of Snelling than we were expecting, and we couldn't always put our fingers on it. Was it people coming out of the parking lot? What was going on? It's very possible that with the closure of that right turn lane, people would just go straight through the signal. They'd take the first right they could, and they'd find themselves up at Shields. And up at Shields, we were forcing them to turn southbound. We weren't allowing any left turns to go north. So called the infinite loop. But I do think in the first couple of games, I think we were almost pushing because of just the way the first closure doesn't happen. We don't really have a second closure. That traffic was just circulating back through the site, and we were having to deal with them multiple times, unfortunately, which is never good for a traffic control plan.
The next one is the northbound right up at Snelling and University. Same thing. The amount of pedestrians crossing there, granted, they weren't transit users. It's more people crossing to go north into the neighborhood, whether they live up there or park up there. But what we were finding was that northbound right turn could never go. And so it was queuing up northbound Snelling all the way back down to the interchange. And so we said, we got to just close the right turn lane and force everyone to go straight. And that helped alleviate some of that congestion on northbound Snelling. Like I had mentioned before, the A-line buses now queue in that right turn lane along northbound Snelling. The Spruce Tree parking ramp, which is used for game day parking, originally we had it planned to come out on Spruce Tree, and so it'd be officer controlled there. The whole street's closed down, but officers would hold pedestrians for a little bit to allow vehicles to come out of that ramp, and they head down Shields and then turn right to get to the interchange. But the police made the decision to get rid of that and force everyone to leave the ramp up through an alley to get to University. I would say that's a mixed result, as that eastbound lane there is closed, and so people couldn't turn. Wouldn't say it was our idea to do that.
No, I would say that was our police commander's decision. And what was actually funny, the first time they did this, they were sending people out there, and all of a sudden it stopped. And what they didn't account for is there was the southbound A-line buses that were blocking the southern University lane. And so all this traffic that was coming out of the Spruce Tree ramp was literally sitting behind a bus that wasn't going to move.
And then people were not paying; they were just sitting on their phone, not paying attention, had no idea that the bus was not moving anytime soon. It was pretty funny to see.
And I think that the reason for this, I think there was good reason for, is that again, after the event, we just had all this traffic going, all the pedestrian traffic going down Spruce Street, either going to private parking lots or going to the westbound LRT, and there was really no way for it to facilitate the Spruce Street ramp exiting. That probably lasts for 15, 20, 25 minutes, and then they could probably start directing Spruce Street traffic back down to Rice Street. I think they've chosen to keep pushing them out to University. This is something I'm sure we'll revisit kind of at the end of the year and talk about the plan for next year if that continues to make sense. But this was probably one of those cases where they kind of, as opposed to like sticking to the plan, they sort of just jump in and say, we need to make a change. This is probably the one that we maybe don't agree with. I think pretty much everything else that's been done from a technical standpoint, we think they've done the right thing.
A few more minutes.
Yep. And then this same thing here, this has been opened up to, and there's been a little bit of fencing put in here. Pedestrians were crossing across Snelling to Spruce Street, but then there's an alleyway there where the vehicles were going. Pedestrians were circumventing the line to get to LRT by going up that alleyway, and so additional fencing, and our officer had to sit down there to make sure people were keeping in line.
Last game that fence was not put up. So it was an interesting thing because that first game, like literally, people were just filtering their way back up to University, and there was a big mess right at the loading point for University at Fry. So you had people that were waiting, and then you had people coming down University, like trying to sort of help butt in line. It was just sort of this mess because there was really no queuing space on the University sidewalk. All the queuing space was on Spruce Street. And also there was a lot of people that just were pedestrians that just wanted to continue walking down University, get their cars that were parked farther out, or were in the neighborhoods or just taking another mode. So it really made a difference to kind of put that fencing up and really force them to use Spruce Street as opposed to cutting them back through to the sidewalk in University.
Exactly. So some of the key findings that we came upon, event parking and kind of the event duration of departure, everything's out in about 45 minutes. Eastbound LRT clears in about 20 minutes, westbound LRT 30 to 40 minutes. I know some people have mentioned to me that it seems like the line takes forever. It's just kind of a rolling queue with the way the trains are coming and what the signals are going. It may look daunting, but it's usually actually not too bad. A-Line, BRT, and the shuttle to the state fairgrounds clear within about 20 to 25 minutes. And the largest ped crossings we see are at the Snelling 94 interchange. You can see here in this picture, it's just kind of a mass of people. Both sides of the interchange sidewalk completely encompassed with people. All the pork chop islands completely covered, and then back towards the stadium, it's a mass of people. So this lasts for about 10-15 minutes, and then it usually peters out as those people get down to their cars. A couple other things here. St. Paul police commanders kind of make changes based on what their experience is, and they make quick modifications, whether or not they are agreeable to them or not is one thing. Controlling pedestrian movements here can be difficult. I think Randy put it the right way. Water finds any way to get into a crack and leak. Pedestrians are the same way. A barrier is not put up the right way. There's a gap in the barrier. They're going to go through it and find the quickest route through, whether we want them to or not.
One of the biggest challenges I think we have, and that we'll have it ongoing, is that people that leave the stadium to the west, they're like just heading out towards Snelling. Our intention was to push them down to Spruce Street or push them up to St. Anthony and really try to keep them away from Snelling. And there was actually fencing and stuff that was put up. If there's any gap in that fencing, or that fencing is removed, people just flood out of the stadium to the west and just go over to Snelling. And then they're walking on a narrow sidewalk. They're kind of, as opposed to coming in sort of a perpendicular line to cross Snelling, there's just sort of creating this intersection point right at Snelling that just makes that movement a little bit harder to facilitate. And we definitely see that at Spruce Street. You have a lot of people just walking down Snelling and then sort of cutting across Snelling at Spruce Street, or just jaywalking across Snelling. So again, I'm not sure how we'll deal with that in the future, but it continues to be an issue. And without having literally a fence that prevents anyone from getting through, they will go through.
Yep. And that usually all funnels down to that Spruce Street crossing, which we found. We put in a 16-foot wide fence in there. Originally, I think we had called for it to be 20 to 24 feet, and I think in reality, that might be something that gets modified to be a little bit wider, so you can get more people across. Like Phil was saying, when we modeled it, we can get 230 to 275 across, but if we can get even more across, that'll help kind of that Snelling operations a little bit. Little details make a big difference. Officer locations, wayfinding signage, making sure your barrier gaps are closed. That helps the plan work well. Making sure all those things are followed. And then as we go along, revisions to the TMP will continue every year, especially as development occurs on the site. Right now, there's nothing to be slated to be built quite yet. But as that occurs, there's going to be more construction out there. There's going to be internal road closures that we have to account for, and how we manage that and move people around will be one of the big things going into the future. And then identifying lessons learned from year one. What do we need to fix? What do we need to change? Uber Lyft here is listed. They kind of go wherever they want. They drop people off in the middle of Snelling, even on the inside lanes. It's not great. It's incredibly unsafe. I haven't heard of anything happening yet, but it feels like an accident waiting to happen.
Well, here, I do want to give real quick. Metro Transit's been unbelievable. If you watch their operation and really how many people they get out of there on transit in that short period of time, it's quite impressive. They have the trains ready, they have the buses ready, and they really do move a lot of people out of there in a hurry. So we have to give them credit for a lot of what we're seeing out there. Also our police, so we've given them a little bit of a hard time about their making some quick decisions, and that there may be a decision or two we don't agree with, but they really are out there. They're the ones out there every day. They're the ones interacting with the public, and they really have most of the things they do every game is really keep people safe, and they're doing a very good job at it. So I want to give them their due credit.
And so kind of wrapping up here, a review of the mode split. We had made some assumptions originally early on and said, okay, how close were we? Some of them are pretty decent. The bike parking, originally we had said there might be 400 to 500 people out there biking. We found that number actually is probably quite a bit higher, especially on nice weekends. And so I think that going in the future, adding more bike racks out there will be something that goes on, which is great because that just lessens the amount of vehicles out here. Total transit users, we're looking at like 5,500. I think originally we had said maybe 7,500. First couple games were closer to that 7,000 number. I think it's lowered a little bit. Estimated 4,000 to 5,000 people park in nearby lots. Originally we had said it might be like 3,500. So right now people are probably taking up about 1,500 to 1,800 parking spaces if you assume a 2.75 vehicle occupancy. So there's maybe another 700 spaces that were found out there. Shuttle users are down to about 2,000 from the original like 4,300 we had assumed. That's an ongoing thing here, trying to get more people to take the shuttle to the fairgrounds. Uber Lyft usage, I think originally we had kind of thought it might be like 500 to 1,000. My gut check right now is maybe it's like 1,500. It could even be higher than that. They're a little hard to track. And then, like we said, verification and updating the mode split is going on. But what happens when we don't have that full 19,500 that we can account for? It's people parking in the neighborhood. And that's something ongoing here. We're further reviewing that, and this is kind of our study area. I will say a preliminary review indicates maybe a half mile is about as far as people are willing to park and walk, depending on the location. The first streets off of Snelling are usually the busiest. A little bit further east and west you go, they thin out. A little bit further north and south you go, they thin out. So I would say game day parking impacts are probably not this big, but it's a pretty close area to there. And then Randy, you want to speak on the permit parking a little bit?
I would say it was interesting before even the opening day. 6 months before, we were getting requests for permit parking on the south side of Snelling, or south side of 94, on both east and west side of Snelling. So we were kind of prepared and did some counting the first couple games. As a result of that, we took a couple permit parking requests to the city council in June. The upper left of the green was approved. It's a couple blocks stretch there. It was, I'd say both these areas were completely parked up during games. There was available parking non-game times. Game times completely parked up. That one was approved. The one on the west side of Snelling, there was a small segment on there, was not approved. And all I can tell you is the difference was we have a ward border that goes right down Snelling Avenue, and our ward for person is really not a fan of permit parking, and I think wanted to let this play out more, where our Ward 1 on the east side was just wanting to, they followed the process and they had the signatures, let's move forward and do it. We did get quite a bit of pushback when we implemented it from sort of the business owners in Snelling. They were very concerned that this was just going to push the problem farther south and take away parking from the businesses. I would say I've received a couple other requests sort of in the northwest of the stadium, but never really any follow-up on them. So it's been actually fairly quiet in that regard. And the only thing I can point to, and I think this is part of the reason why the one was denied, is we are talking about 20, 30 dates a year. There's not a lot of other events, and they're at all different times. So any sort of sign that we come up for permit parking, it becomes pretty restrictive for these kind of minimal dates. So whether or not actually they could get approval in the future, I'm not sure, but we'll kind of take them as they come. But no plans right now we have no active requests right now.
All right, and that is it. I don't know if we have time for questions or not, but
Yeah, we did run a little over, so I'm sure if you guys are welcome to it. If anyone does have questions, they can come up and ask them in person, but we did run about 10 minutes over, so I want to respect your time and let people file out if they need to. So if we can thank our presenters.